And then he goes, my man, what kind of gun are you packing? And I'm like, what? What do you mean, what gun? I'm like, yeah, it's a dangerous country. You don't have a gun? I'm like, what do you mean I don't have a gun? Why would I be on a bicycle and have a gun? I'm like, and then the gentleman was surprised. I mean, he called his wife and said, this man is riding around the US and is not like packing. Now, I was shocked because he didn't even ask the first question that should be asked, which is, are you packing? He just went straight to the point and said, what are you packing? Like, as in, it goes without saying that, of course, you're packing. What are you packing?
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. I'm Matthew Pioro, and joining me is Matt Hansen. Matt Hansen, how you doing?
Really good, and I'm not doing that bit anymore. I'm over it.
Which bit is this?
The whole, welcome to welcome. See, I'm already rusty.
Yeah, wow, you're out of practice and it's only been 2 weeks.
Welcome to the Canadian Cycling Magazine podcast. I'm Matthew Pioro.
Hey Matt, what's the longest ride you've ever done? Like, I'm talking consecutive days of riding.
Like, longest ride one? I think I did, 300K probably.
That's in one go, but like, say, what's your longest, say, stretch of riding in days?
I don't know, like probably like every day of the month kind of thing. I don't know. I mean, I probably would take a rest day. I'm not crazy.
Imagine riding for 6 months around the US, and that's what our guest today has done. He's known as JaBig. I would butcher his name if I tried to say it, but his first name is Jean-Aimé. And, you know, I'm going to sound like I'm burying the lead when I say he rode around the US in 6 months, which is pretty impressive, how much distance he covered. But he's also known for riding to Tuktoyaktuk on a fixie in the winter. And so that's sort of what launched him into a lot of people's, launched him into the popular consciousness. He's also a writer. He's written for a Canadian Cycling Magazine. He did a feature on some of his cross-Canada tours. And I'm really excited to talk with him about his latest adventure.
6 months. That's a lot of riding.
It's a lot of riding. But before my chat with JaBig, Matt Hansen, tomorrow is the return of the Grand Prix Cyclistes de Québec.
Finally, after 2 years.
After 2 years of pandemic-induced hiatus, it's returning. Let's remind listeners who's won in Quebec. It's a pretty impressive list of who's won there. It started in 2010 with Thomas Voeckler, and other winners have been Philippe Gilbert, Simon Gerrans, Robert Hessink, Rigoberto Urán, Peter Sagan, and Michael Matthews. What's 2 days after that?
A little race in Montreal.
That's right. Again, let's remind people of who's won there before we get into who's going to be there this year. Winners in Montreal have included, again, Robert Hessink. And there was also Roy Costa, Peter Sagan, Simon Gerrans again, Tim Wellens, Greg Van Avermaet, Diego Ulissi, Michael Matthews again, and Greg Van Avermaet, he won, twice there. You know what, though? You know where Greg Van Avermaet has not won?
In Quebec City.
Yeah, even though he's been second 4 times and third 2 times.
You know, it's interesting. I talked to him the other day, and he really said how it's strange to him how he's won on Montreal, and he always thought that Quebec would suit him better. Now, of course, being on the podium a few times is not exactly, a crappy day, but he definitely must be hungry to take that finally.
Speaking of hungry, didn't he talk about bagels?
Yes, he did. And I won't mention it now. I mentioned 2 in my copy of the story. I mentioned that he'll either be visiting one particular place or one other particular place. And I got to say, the comments about the bagels in Montreal, that was pretty lit. There were some strong opinions. But yeah, he definitely said one of the things he's looking forward to is just being outside of Europe for a big race that feels like Europe and has all the European favorites, but isn't Europe. Just a change of pace. And that makes sense. And plus the bagels, right? Yum.
You know what I'm surprised that doesn't get more coverage is poutine. Like, I want to know, I guess we can calculate this. I want to know how much poutine a pro rider burns through in one of those races. We could look at the kilojoules that they expend.
Probably just like one serving. If you've ever had poutine before, you know, like you ride for 6 hours, you might get maybe 3 cheese curds, a bit of gravy. You know, I think it's a pretty high caloric food. I mean, again, I'm sure after doing those races, you could probably down a couple of those. But yeah, it'd be interesting, kind of like measuring per pizza slices.
Dear Zwift, can you measure my efforts on Zwift in poutine, please, instead of pizza slices?
A normal poutine, none of this like chicken barbecue, you know, I've seen pierogi poutine lately, which I'm pretty sure is sacrilegious. Just normal, you know, gravy, drowned curds and fries. None of this weirdo stuff. This California poutine.
The poutine has to be created east of the Ottawa River. So, in the current issue of Canadian Cycling Magazine, I have a very short story, just looking forward to these races. It was cheekily titled something like, Wout is coming, Wout is coming, because for months now, it's been on his race calendar, which is Wout van Aert, that is, which is pretty exciting. But the list of names that are scheduled to line up are pretty cool.
The who's who, I would say.
Yes, we have... Tadej Pogačar is supposed to be there. And for me, I think it's pretty exciting that Biniam Girmay, who won Ghent-Wevelgem and a stage of the Giro this year, the Eritrean rider.
And that course, Quebec, I mean, that's totally a punchy kind of course for him. I could totally see him doing well there.
Yeah, that's right. We were just before we hit record, we were debating the climbiness of these courses. And you made a good point about what the inclines of Quebec and Montreal mean for pro-level cyclists.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny. Montreal is a long climb, 2K or whatever, but it's not a mountain at all. I mean, these guys, this is just a blip to these guys. So when you talk to mortals like guys, oh man, it's so hilly. It is, but it's not. I mean, it's still a sprinter. I mean, as we've seen, some of the people who won it, they're what we call sprinters. And you and I always make this joke, too, when someone says, oh, man, Mark Cavendish is a crappy climber. Well, no, he's not, actually. He's a million times better than 99% of the world. Just like, it's just that he's not as good a climber as Pogačar.
Yeah, and when you mean sprinters, I know you're not saying pure sprinters. It's like these courses don't suit a Cavendish, but like these kind of ruler types like your Avermaets and your Sagans. Well, Sagan is pretty sprinty, now that you mention it. But yes, someone who has the ability to get over stuff, but still have a good finishing kick, like Michael Matthews. We saw him at the Tour tangle with some inclines, and he won a stage. This is the problem, though. I have to bring up my article again. I was interviewing Sebastian Arsenault, the CEO of the races, and I was testing the idea of like, oh look, you've been, these races haven't happened for 2 years. And the people who were mopping up at these races, your Michael Matthews, your Peter Sagans, your Greg Van Avermaets, they put on a few years and maybe they aren't performing like they were 2 or 3 years ago. And he cautioned me, these are champions. Don't count them out just yet. And sure enough, this was shortly before Michael Matthews won a stage at the Tour. So I'm like, yeah, I guess we can't count him out.
But I think that's an interesting point, though, with this 2-year hiatus, with guys like Greg, let's call him Greg, because I always mess up his last name, Greg V.
Oh, because, yeah, you and he are tight.
Yeah, Greg and me. Anyway, it's interesting, though, 2 years has been passed, or now it's 2019 was the last time, so there's a whole new crop of guys, as we all know. So that's what's interesting, too. It's sort of like he's gone through a bit of a time capsule, because now you've got these reverse time capsule, Pogačar and some of the other riders who were obviously around, but they weren't as dominant as they are now. That's what I find really interesting.
Exactly. It'll be interesting, the mix of the old and new. Any bets? You favor anybody for a certain course? What are you thinking?
I mean, I think that Belgian fella, he looks pretty good. I think I'd put my money on him for I don't know, both of them. I think I could see him doing the double if he's on form.
I don't know which Belgian fellow you're talking about. Greg Van Avermaet? Wout van Aert?
Yeah, that's the one. Oh, yeah, I guess there's a couple Belgian guys. Well, my buddy Greg, too. I want my buddy Greg to win.
Okay, I'm going to translate Matt Hansen to everybody. I think Matt Hansen just picked Wout van Aert for both of them.
Yeah, I think so. But I think, I think the weather could be a factor, too. I mean, it looks like it's supposed to be okay, but...
Yeah, well, it's interesting because Tim Wellens won in Montreal on a crazy wet day. And that's not to take away from his dry weather performances, but I remember that race. I wasn't there, but the photographers we were working with we could barely get pictures. It was so crazy.
Well, I think both races, I mean, Montreal is way more atrocious than Quebec, but both of those, if the weather is not great, if the wind is strong, I mean, it can just make everything that much tougher, right? And just take it away, and it could be a smaller group. Who knows? Well,
it will be good racing, and I'm so excited that they're back. I'm going to be watching those intently. Let us now turn to the feature interview for this episode. As I mentioned, JaBig has done some very big rides, and he's also a really good talker and storyteller. So this episode is a bit longer than usual. He's a great guy. He can laugh at himself and his own sort of follies and foibles. He will tell you things like why he felt safer riding on interstates when it was legal than on quiet back roads. He will talk about bike chondria or being a bike chondriac. Do you know what that is, Matt?
I have a feeling what it is, but I'm too scared to say what it is.
And some of his stories are quite, I'll just say, straight up shocking. Like when he met someone who wanted to help him buy a gun. I'll just leave it at that. And he will unpack that story in this interview. So let's hear from JaBig. JaBig, who you are also known as Jean-Aimé Bigirimana.
It's actually, my name is Jean-Aimé Bigirimana, and I'm mostly known as JaBig.
Well, you will be JaBig for the rest of this interview. About a month ago, JaBig, you finished a big cycling tour of the U.S. We're going to get into that trip, but I want to go back to your first big bike trip. In January 2016, you left Montreal, you went to the Atlantic Ocean, then turned around and went to the Pacific, and then you headed north to the Arctic Ocean. You were on a fixie. You rode through winter. And you started this trip about 6 months after getting into cycling, like seriously into cycling. Why did you do that ride on a fixie?
So one day I was randomly, I walked by a bike shop and I saw a nice bike and I said, oh, you know what? I've never owned a bike in my life. I mean, except for the one that my parents bought me as a child. So I walked in and I said, oh, I'd like this bike. And they said, okay, but it's a fixed gear bike. I'm like, what is it? They're trying to explain to me what it was. I couldn't get it. They're like, you know what? Why don't you try this one here and then ride it around the block? I rode it around the block. I slowed down and then I rolled over the handlebars because the pedals kept spinning. And I'm like, wow, that's a weird bike, but I like the feeling of one I felt with the bike. So I purchased the bike and I started riding it all over the place. And eventually I said, you know what? People had introduced me to a small app called Strava. They said, you should use that app whenever you ride and then log your distances. So that whole summer, I was riding everywhere. And the reason I had so much time to ride from Monday to Thursday is because I'm a professional DJ and I work on weekends, which means, from Thursday until Saturday. So my weekdays, I would just ride my bike. And then before I knew it, in October, I looked at this Strava thing and I said, total distance covered, 5,000 kilometers. And I said, oh, wow, that's almost from Montreal to Vancouver. And that's where the idea came from. At the time, I was a little bit, I was feeling a little bit worn out and, burnt out from my DJ career. So I decided, you know what, let me just ride across Canada. And the reason I took a fixed gear was because I was, I said, okay, the one thing I remembered is the bike I had was a little bit aggressive. I didn't know what that meant, but it meant very sporty. I'm like, what do you mean aggressive? Like the bike wants to attack me? But it turns out it just meant sporty. And I said, oh, I'm just going to get one that's a little bit more relaxed, but also one that can accommodate wider tires because I knew I was going to go into places that were full of snow. And so when I went to the bike shop and I said, oh, can you give me that? There's a frame I'm looking for. Can you look it for me? They're like, you can't ride across Canada on a fixed gear bike. That's silly. And I was like, oh, challenge accepted. So that's pretty much why I decided to do it, because I was like, this is the bike I like. I like it. I've been doing big distances with it. And now if people said it can be done, that's on them. They can't do it, but it doesn't mean that, I can do it. So it was pretty much a challenge. And, it was a challenge. And the fact that people said you can't do it. And then I went ahead and did it. Now, was it the worst thing to do? Well, let me put it this way. Now I'm a little bit smarter. I want to do it on a fixie again.
I was going to say that. You ride with gears now, but how do you look back on your fixie ride? How do you feel about your younger, I'm saying quote unquote, younger cycling self?
Well, surprisingly, the only thing that changes, to be honest, is the fact that I don't have to plan my routes. With my fixed gear bike, I have to be mindful of hills and avoid them. Whereas now with a bicycle with gear, I just go wherever I want, because I know that I have the gears for it. But when it comes to climbing, when it comes to average speed and everything, I found that not much has changed, because the one thing that a fixed gear is good for is that you just have to push down and the bike does everything else. Like, for instance, I find that I don't necessarily climb faster or slower with a bike with gears, because with a fixed gear, I usually climb better out of the saddle. And I found that if you're climbing out of the saddle on a fixed gear, it's much easier, because you just have to push down and the bike does, keeps the momentum for you. But then, of course, the difference between touring on a fixed gear bike and on a bicycle with gears, with a bicycle with gears, I don't have to take sometimes off to rest my knees. And it's more efficient. But if I had to go back on a fixed gear bike, I wouldn't feel like it's a big downgrade or anything. If anything, it's just a different challenge. I would just equate it to driving a manual car, an automatic car. Each has its advantage and it's convenient. But, now that I'm getting older, a bicycle with gear is much more pleasant.
After your coast to coast to coast ride, you planned an around the world bike ride. You left in August 2019. Months later, you were in Europe and the pandemic was shutting things down. You had to return to Canada. For that trip, and your recent US one, you had a charitable component. You were raising money for World Bicycle Relief. Tell me a bit more about that charity and how you connected with it.
So World Bicycle Relief is, first of all, let me explain what it is. It's a charity that provides bicycles to children, healthcare workers, farmers in rural Africa, so that they can, get around. Because some parts of rural Africa, there are not roads and there are no cars. And for me, I focused on the educational aspect area of World Bicycle Relief, because I hear that sometimes the reason why somebody doesn't have an education ever was just because school was too far. If you think about it, that's not a reason for somebody to not be able to get an education. I'm African born. I was born in Rwanda in 1979. And the reason I have the life I live, doesn't mean that I'm happier or I'm better than anybody else. It just means that I come from I won the lottery, and I was born into a family of educated parents who gave me a very comfortable life. I went to some of the best schools and I had a very comfortable life. And it's not because I'm better than anyone. It's just because I had the opportunity. And for me, I see it as my duty as an African who has the privilege to be able to do what I want, to give back to my continent by allowing at least people to get to school and give them the opportunity of education, which opens big opportunities. So when I rode across Canada, the first time on a fixed gear bike, it's really got a lot of attention. From overnight, I was a cycling star, quote unquote, because everyone thought this is just crazy. This man who came out of nowhere and he's a DJ, because it seems like people don't have much expectations from DJs. They're like, oh, and he's a DJ. I'm like, what do you mean? And he's a DJ, so I guess, but also the DJ world was, who's this DJ who's doing this stuff? So even DJs ourselves were like, but you're a DJ, So it got a lot of attention. And I said, well, that's a lot of attention that I could be putting to better use. Because I also found that whenever I rode, people would ask me, oh, what charity is it for? I'm like, no, I'm just riding for myself. I just need to put my thoughts together. Some people walk around the block. I'm riding across Canada. So it's almost as if it felt almost like selfish to be riding for no cause. So I said, okay, you know what? I have all this attention and I can get my own attention and still share it with a worthy cause. So I had this idea of like providing bicycles to children in Africa, but then I thought, you know what, I know I'm a smart guy, but I'm sure somebody has come up with a better, concept. And I just went to Google and I typed bicycle to children in Africa, and World Bicycle Relief came out first. And I read about them and I was like, oh my goodness, they have figured out something that I was struggling with and I would have never figured out, which is if I took a bicycle from Montreal or from Vancouver, where I am right now, and I send it to somebody in rural Africa, I also need to send the parts, because otherwise, if that bike breaks, it's pretty much become a dumping ground. Like if it breaks and they don't have the tools to replace it, then it's game over. However, World Bicycle Relief went a step further and they actually send the components to Africa, and then the bikes are built there and they also service there, and the bonus is that it also creates extra jobs, additional jobs, because now there are mechanics and there are people who look after these bikes, and that was brilliant, And I said, you know what, I'm just gonna let pros, like the pros handle that. But also, I can barely manage my own life, and I don't work with. I'm a social person, but I don't work well with people because I'm too impatient. I want things to be done yesterday. I said, I'm just gonna ride my bike, and I'm gonna let them handle the bicycle. So then I messaged them. I said, hey, this is who I am, and I'd like to support you. And they're like, of course. So they set up a fundraising page for me on the website, and then I started from there. So basically, I introduced myself. And if anyone out there is listening, anyone can do that. They can create a web page for you, and you can start on fundraising. And $20,000 later, that's here I am, I guess.
So turning to your most recent ride, tell me why you chose to ride through the U.S. Why did you pick that country?
Like you mentioned, I was riding around the world in 2019 and 2020, and then the pandemic changed the whole world. And in my opinion, it also changed touring, and because the world changed, and I know that it's going to take a while before the world goes back to 100% normal. But also, I'd given myself 5 years to do it. And the pandemic pretty much took 3 years away of those 5 years, because I'm a DJ, and when I'm on a bicycle on this trip that lasts, the shortest has been 3 months when I rode across Canada for the second time. And the longest has been when I rode across Canada for the first time, which was 15 months. And the one across, around the world was 6 months, and the one, in the US was 6 months. That's a lot of time. And it prevents me from doing things that, quote unquote, adults are supposed to do, like, save and buy a home and meet somebody for, meet like a significant other, because all the money I make, I have to spend it on my trips because they're self-financed. And also when I meet somebody, they're like, where do I fit in your life, since we've just met and you want to be gone for like 6 months, and then after you come back, you want to go on another adventure? With the pandemic, I realized that my trip around the world was pretty much over and I would have to scratch that. So I told myself, let me go on one last big ride, which is self-financed. And I said, where can I go? And I'm like, okay, I can't go across Canada for the third time, because that's just like, then I become Forrest Gump. And I figured, okay, let me figure out something else that's a challenge, but it's within the same comfort zone. And I'm saying, you know what? I've been in the US quite often, and I'm well traveled within the USA, but I know the big cities. Why not ride it? And the reason I came up with that, like, it freaks me out. So if it doesn't freak you out, then it's not a challenge. So I said, okay, let me go to the US. It's same, but different than Canada. And as you see later, it's it's not even same, it's just different, same. You know what I mean? And they decided, okay, the US is next door. And also if there's like another crisis, like another like pandemic or something crazy, I can just cross the border versus catching a flight from Europe. And also I figured culturally it's the same. And also, I have a lot of contacts there because I have my biggest fan base is in the US, but also most of the brands that support my trips, the best in the US, and the biggest social media follower are from the US. So, and then it's just, the US is fascinating. And there's this joke that I like to say, and I'm going to say it with the most, and please everyone, it's a joke. When you live on the second floor and the first floor, there's like a very turbulent neighbor. You want to go see what's going on there, you know what I mean?
I want to get into the differences you detected, or the same but different, the different but same, a little later. But I do want to just find out a bit more about your thoughts on the route. You went on a counterclockwise route. You started in Seattle, went south, east, north, and then west. Why did you pick that route?
So I actually started in Vancouver, and that's why I picked that route, because I moved to Vancouver in March 2021 during the pandemic, because Quebec came up with this, first of all, Quebec has a very long winter, and I was envious to see my friends in Vancouver that were riding in March, and I was falling flat on my face in Montreal on the snow on my bike. And they said, "What are you doing? Just move over here." And I said, "I don't have a place to stay." They're like, "Don't worry, we have a big house." We had the conversation on Tuesday. On Monday, I was in a plane, and I've been to Vancouver ever since. So then, when I decided to do the trip, I figured it's just easier to cross the border from Vancouver into Washington State and start from there. And the reason I took the route, from Seattle, San Diego, Southern States, all the way to Portland, Maine, and then back through the northern part, is just because I left in February. And in February, if I'd gone the other way around, I would have to deal with winter. And I've learned my lesson with winter cycling. But also, I wanted to go through the wind. In February, the wind is usually, it comes from the Arctic. It's always Arctic front. So I knew that the Pacific coast, I was going to have tailwind all the way. But also the weather would be a little bit better. I mean, yes, in Washington State and Oregon, I got rained on. But as soon as I crossed into California, it was hot. And the third reason why I picked that route was because I didn't want to deal with Arizona, Texas, and Louisiana in summer. So I needed to do them in winter. And despite that, by the time I hit Arizona, it was already 41, 45 degrees. And that was just in March. So I don't want to know what would have happened if I'd crossed them in July. So that's why I picked that. Yeah, actually, that's why I picked that. It was actually very strategic. Now, if I'd started in, let's say, for instance, if I started my trip in July, then I would have gone the other way around.
Right. And I guess the drawback of the route you chose is that, if I remember correctly, you faced nasty headwinds on your westerly journey. And you even had to jump on a bus a few times because you were running out of time. What was your time limit? What was your time constraint? I know you said 6 months, but why 6 months?
So as Canadian citizen, we can only stay in the US for 6 months. That's why even snowbirds can only stay in the US for 180 days, because you have to come back. But also the other thing that happens is that if you are away from Canada, no matter the province, after 6 months, you run out of your healthcare benefits. So, it's a visa issue and also healthcare, So that's why I picked 6 months. And that's why, I guess I figured that now I have a bicycle with gears, I can just shift the gears and go faster. But then I realized, man, if you slow on a fixed gear bike, you slow on a bicycle with gears. And that wind, oh my goodness, that wind just sucked the life out of me. However, it didn't matter which direction I went, because even in Texas, I still faced the wind. Even though I was going with the trade winds, I still got some wind in Texas. So I don't want to imagine, I'm going in a circle, so sooner or later, I was going to face a headwind. That's just a fact of life. And it's just that I hit them in the northern states. But then I was out of time, tired from, 5 months of hard riding. And and there was also nothing to see. You know what I mean? You just look at the only one tree that there is on the horizon, you look at it for 2 hours because you're moving so slowly with the wind that doesn't stop. So I was like, you know what, let me hop onto the bus, which I did. And by the time I was finished my ride, I had 1 week to spare, which means that had I not taken a bus, I would have sort of overstayed my visa. And there's one thing you don't want to do. You don't want to overstay your US visa because it can lead to a 10-year ban, and the US is such an important country and I like it so much that I don't want to be banned for 10 years just because I wanted to prove a point and ride the winds of North Dakota and Montana. If I really want to prove a point, I can go to Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and all of them, and then, try to ride in them. But I'm not going to do that because I hate the wind. And actually, I have to say, it's the first time in my life that cycling gave me mental health problems. I was I went into very dark places because of the wind. And I was like, wow, cycling is not supposed to do that. So that's another reason why I called the bus. I'm like, I don't want to associate cycling with something so negative. And I know for some people it's not being a hard ass, enough. But I'm like, yeah, my mental health is important. I'm not paid to ride bicycles. It's my escapism, and I can have my escapism being the one thing that becomes like pretty much like my toxic abuser. You know what I mean? So yeah.
I find that striking because I know part of the reason, or one of the reasons you did your first Cross Canada tour is to clear your head, find some mental space. You made the joke earlier, like most people go around the block. You went around the country. So yeah, that seems like you've just got into dangerous territory there with the wind is making you suffer so much. And it's also, to me, striking because in pro cycling, the talk is always of suffering, and that's a refrain you hear so much for the pros. But you're not a pro, so you need to, like you said, manage your mental health.
Yeah, I love riding my bike. I found cycling in 2015, and it's been my sort of like saving grace. It's what I do. It's as an introverted person who has to live a very social life because my DJ career is very social, and I need somewhere to sort of like go and sort of like refill my cup. That's cycling. So I didn't want cycling to be like something that's associated with negative emotions and energy. And to be honest, before I used to never think about e-bikes, but now e-bikes have become like, now I'm more accepting of e-bikes because I told myself, I swear if I had an e-bike, I would have just popped the motor and I would have just, because I realized I like being on a bicycle. And the exercise is like almost like the third thing on the list. I like to be on a bicycle. I don't necessarily like to pedal hard like a maniac. I did it because it needs to be done, but not at the sake of my physical health and mental health. No ways. And maybe it was an important lesson that I needed to learn because I never really reached my limits, and I found that my limits is the wind. Give me the biggest hill. I've climbed the Rocky Mountains. Everything on a fixed gear bike, and I survived. But the wind, like 3 days of consecutive wind, and 1 week, 2 weeks, forget that. No, thank you.
As you mentioned, you're a professional DJ. Both DJing and cycling can be gear-heavy pursuits. Some DJs are really into their gear. Are you into the process of mixing and, say, keeping a dance floor going more than nerding out on equipment?
That's actually a very good question because it's actually an eye opener. So in my early DJ days, I was like, okay, I need to get the SF 1200s. I need to get this mixer. I need to get this. I need to get the, finest and this and that. But then I realized it's about the music, and nobody but me or other DJs care about the tools that are used. People are listening to my music. They just want to hear good music and dance. So focus on the music. So as time went by, I just use what's at my disposal. Sometimes I'll even if I don't have a tool, I'll even use my phone, Whereas if I'm doing an event and the client has the means, I will get top of the line because the top of line equipment allows you to do more. It's a tool. So the more you're able to do with the tool, the more creative you can be and the better the service you can offer. However, I've done parties with things that were so broken, so it doesn't matter. So right now I'm at a stage where I don't care about the equipment as a DJ. However, when it comes to cycling, I find that it's, because I'm not a comfortable cyclist yet, I find that I just like to get the best of the best because then I'm comfortable. And sometimes, like for instance, there's this thing, I tell people that I got 3 flats, in the whole trip, and my bike never suffered a mechanical. And they're like, but everyone suffers a mechanical. And that's just because I got the best of the best of the best, and it was brand new, or well serviced. But I'm sure that if I learn to be my own mechanic, I can barely change a tire. To tell you how bad I am, I'm not gonna say when because I don't want to say how recent this was. I went to a bike shop to return my third pump because they weren't working, and they said, "Why aren't they working?" Like, I don't know, it's not working. And then they told me, "How are you pumping your tire?" And then I showed them, and it turns out I had to turn the little valve first. That's how bad I am. So if I'm not, and I know out there people say, why would you be proud of being such an ignorant and, mechanic and, and you're out there doing adventures. And I'm like, hey, last time I checked, I haven't called any of you to come, bail me out. I'm not a good mechanic, but I have people's skills, and those are the ones that I use. I can trump somebody to drive me to a bike shop. You know what I mean? And then they're like, yeah, but you're wasting time. I'm like, yeah, it's my time I'm wasting, not yours. So let me be, So I don't know a lot. So I'll get, for instance, tires that I know are the best against sort of like flats, yet roll relatively well. I'll get a very good frame. I'll get a very group set. And of course, those things, they're costly. However, people are surprised that I only rode one chain for 13,000 kilometers around the US. I'm like, well, just because I picked the best chain. I never had issues with my drivetrain. I'm like, well, that's because I picked the right drivetrain, So in cycling, for me, equipment matters because I don't have the confidence to be, to adapt if something goes wrong. If that answers the question.
It does, but I've also heard you say that you're a bit of a, what's the term? Bikeochondriac?
Yeah.
Unpack that term for us.
Wow, you pay attention to what I write on social media. I like that. So, yeah, so for me, since I'm not a mechanic, I'm on a bike, things are rolling, things are moving, things are twisting. Well, I'm not a mechanic, but I have a brain that tells me if something is constantly moving, it's prone to breaking. And I would rather, so I know it's going to break or it's going to get damaged. So I'd rather get ahead of it. I'd rather prevent than repair. So for every now and then when I would stop into a major city, and eventually my trips, they get a lot of attention. So I would get, mechanics, like from the ones who are professional mechanics who work at the bike shops or people who work, who own a fleet of bikes. And the rule is always make sure that the person owns a nicer bike than you because, they take care of you. They're going to take care of your bike. And they will say, oh, do you want me to look at your bike? And I'm like, sure. And many times I found out that, my brake pads were about to get worn, that, that my bearings were about to, I remember before I left San Francisco, I went to above category and the mechanic told me, yo, you better change your bearings because you're not going to make it, you're not going to make it past the desert. And I was like, wow, thank you so much. Because imagine that happened to me when I was in, Arizona in the middle of the desert when there's not even one house, never mind a bike shop. Then I would have been in trouble. So for me, bikeochondriac, I'm like, I expect that everything is going to go wrong, even if I know that it's the best, it's the finest, I'm dealing with the finest components, but I know that things break and they're meant to be used. I'm not one of those people, I don't abuse my bikes, but I use them. So I know that if I use them, they're going to get used. So I get ahead of it by getting them checked out before, things get critical. And that's another reason why I don't run into problems because I address them. Of course, the only time it doesn't work is when you get a serious flat. But, that's life. There's nothing you can do about that.
You have a solid presence on social media. YouTube was important for your DJ career. Tell me how services like Instagram and Strava have helped you in your cycling career.
Let's just talk about, the pragmatic element of it. The more people know about you, the more people know about you. That sounds like a repetition, but it's, I'm going to sort of like explain what I mean. When I was running the US, enough people knew about me, and that allowed me to get people to sort of like offer me places to stay. Like, for instance, in many times I would get somebody who lived in Los Angeles, and then I would stay with them. But then they said, oh, I have a friend in San Diego, or I have a friend, and then the person in San Diego, I have a friend and this and that. Because then it's networking, I have a big network. So I was able to get places to stay and the reason I say places to stay is because I don't camp. I signed up for riding across the countries. I don't camp because, I'm a coward. I don't like to sleep outside, and I guess I need to have a shower, and this business of doing a business outdoors doesn't sit well with me. You know what I mean? So, I like the comfort of a bed and a warm shower. So I used my network, but I also used a website called Warm Showers. And Warm Showers is pretty much couchsurfing for cyclists. So it's strangers signing up to host you, but they still need to vet you. So when they go and type in Google, who the heck is this guy? And they see, oh my goodness, he's, he has a big social media following. And it adds a little bit of, it's a big credential. Now, it doesn't mean that, it doesn't mean that I'm a better human being than anyone else. I could still be a jerk, or maybe I am, who knows. But it just means that it helps people to say, oh, he has a lot to lose, meaning he's not going to act stupid because he has a lot of, he's a public figure, so he has something to lose. But it's more like about networking and this and that. But also, the elephant in the room is that, I'm here talking about how I can get the best components and this and that. I can get them because they are supplied by some of the brands that support my trip. I can name a few. I don't know if I'm allowed to do this on this show.
You can.
Yeah, so, I have like Schramm, Zip, René Hers, Brooks, Wahoo, Telfin, Lek, Rafa, they all support my, I'm sure I'm forgetting some, they support my trip and they provide me with the gear and, to do what I do. And I'm a nice guy, but it wouldn't happen if I didn't have the social media audience. And I do know that it's because for most of them, it's because I did do some big rides and also look different, and some brands want to diversify. And that's thanks to a big social media, presence. Sometimes I get special treatments. Like, for instance, bike shops, hey, do you want coming here? We're going to look after your bike. And do you mind just sharing on social media that you were here? I'm like, yeah, of course. I was going to do it anyway because it's part of the narrative of the story and part of the, I like to brag that I'm hypochondriac. So I need to show that my bike is at the bike shop. But if the bike shop also got benefit from, from the quote unquote publicity and, and they get to do something good, everyone wins. So yes, it does help. And that's another thing. You know how sometimes you get some of these rich people who tell you, oh, this is how I made my money. You have to work hard and this and that. You have to, I started from the bottom and I got here, this and that. And that's like gaslighting you to believing that you're not where you are because of hard work. Meanwhile, they conveniently forget to tell you that their parents funded them with like $500,000 or that they dropped out of Harvard, which means that if you go into Harvard to begin with, you don't drop out of Harvard if you're on a bursary. It means your parents are paying for you. So in my end too, when I talk about my trips, the reason they go well, it's because I would be a liar if I say it's because I'm a nice guy or because I work hard. The fact that I have a social media presence helps a lot, But then, of course, how did I get it? Because of the trips I do and and the work I've done. But they go hand in hand. But it's an important disclosure to say that anyone's mileage may vary. Just as if you are a very wealthy adventurer, then you don't even need to social media because you can just pay through everything.
I think at the root of it, it's like you are you're a good networker, and that serves people in all kinds of careers. And also social media, we've seen the growth, at least in the last 5 years, of I don't know how you feel about this term, influencer, but that's what you've become. You have a good social media following and people want to know what you're doing. Like, you're actually giving them interesting stories to follow. So it comes legitimately with that.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, and this is where the whole influence thing, people used to call me an influencer and I used to get offended until one day I realized, hang on a minute, I know 6 people, and I stopped counting after 6 because I don't keep up anymore. 6 people told me that they've bought an open frame thanks to seeing my adventures and for me talking about it. They're like, I'd heard of it, but I told myself, if this thing is riding, if this guy is riding across countries with it and he seemed to be in love with them, maybe I should check it out. And then they went to ride it and they liked it and they bought it. You know what I mean? So I am not naive to know that I do sort of like influence people, but I wouldn't call them, because for me, influencers are people who are just pretending to do something, but they're not doing it, And it is true that in cycling, some of these quote unquote influencers, you look at them and you're like, okay, thank you very much, but show me your Strava. And then, of course, who says that it has to happen the way, it can be a job, you know what I mean? Nobody says that if you're riding to the cafe, that's riding a bicycle. It's better than sitting on the sofa. Not that there's something wrong with sitting on the sofa, because I don't want professional sofa sitters to come at me and try to cancel me, but what I'm trying to get at is that, I do know that I do influence people, and I do know, but one thing I know though, is that what I say, before I used to write what I thought, I'm like, I don't care. But now I have to be more mindful of what I write because I know it has impact, especially when it comes to cycling. Like, for instance, I'm trying to find a way to tell people not to ride around the US the way I did it because it was dangerous. But I don't want to tell them that because I don't want people just freaking out and saying riding around the US is dangerous. There are safer ways of doing it, but the way I do it, there is no way in hell I would advise anyone to ride it the way I did it. Because I was pressed for time, so I would get into interstates when I was legally allowed to do it. I would take some roads that were a little bit questionable because I don't mind traffic. I'm a city person. However, I'm aware that it just takes one person on the phone and then bye-bye, Jean, you know what I mean? So, whereas I would advise people to just follow adventure, cycling, safe routes and this and that and take them, but the trip is going to be longer. And then the other thing too, adventure cycling, they want you on small remote roads because they're safer. But they're safer for everybody except me, if you look like me, because sometimes you go there and there's some questionable flags flying and I'm like, do I really want to be here with these people around? And I'm the only one on a bicycle looking the way I do and knowing that some of these people have a certain attitude towards people who look like me. And I'm like, you know what, let me try my luck on the highway. It's safer for me because that's my I feel safer. Because safety is in the eyes of the beholder. If some people feel safe on small roads. And the other thing too, I'd rather ride on an interstate than on a small road because interstate I have my own shoulder and a rumble strip. Yes, there's more traffic, but I have my own lane. On small roads, you have to really hope that somebody is willing to stop, overtake you safely, and then go on the other side, And also on smaller roads, there are less witnesses. So if someone wants really hate cyclists or the way you look, bye-bye.
You touched on a lot of things just there that I have to admit I was curious about from your route selection, whether you were going to pick more scenic roads versus more direct roads, let's say. And yeah, to me, an interstate sounds totally unpleasant. But, your argument for them, well, I understand your perspective on it for sure. And then I was going to ask you about safety and comfort and you spoke about back roads with flags that make you feel uncomfortable. Were there parts of the U.S. that you were uncomfortable about or had concerns about as you were going to bike through them?
Well, when I rode around the U.S., people from Americans to Europeans to everybody, from everyone, no matter what, they warned me about some areas. Now, I'm not going to list any because I don't want people from those areas to come at me like the way they did when things happened to me and I was complaining that things happened to me and then they were like, no, they didn't happen to you. And I'm like, I almost got run over by a car and you're telling me it didn't happen to me. Anyway, but I was like, you know what? I cannot live in fear. I cannot let people dictate how I live my life. Because, I'm a genocide survivor. I'm like, whatever, I survived that. I can survive that. However, with distance, I should have paid attention because sometimes what people say about some areas, they found there's some truth. And by the way, it's in all the states. So let me just put it out there. There's some areas there's some pockets areas where I felt unsafe. And then there's some states where I just felt unsafe in the whole state. Fortunately, they were a small state and I usually did them in like 6 hours or more. Or less rather. But then if you look at statistically speaking, there were more chances of me getting hit by a car, even in Montreal or Vancouver, than something happened to me there. But the thing with fear and personal fears is like, everyone has their fear. You know what I mean? I met somebody who said, my biggest fear on touring is running out of food. I'm like, what do you mean? That's just a weird fear. I'm like, that's like the weirdest fear. Like, you can just keep going without food. Yeah, but if I don't have fuel, I'm like, well, then you toughen it up and then you keep pedaling. But then I caught myself saying, who am I to tell somebody that the fear is not valid? You know what I mean? So, something here, my fear, was about, me. The stories that happen in the US, they're not fabricated. And I know that, first of all, I'm a cyclist. And no matter what your race is, people hate cyclists. Motorists hate cyclists for the most part. They cannot tolerate them. So everyone, no matter the race, the gender, everyone on a bicycle has a story of motorists being absolute nightmare. Now, I'm also, a black person in some parts where people don't like, you have issues with, some people have issues. And now you're a black man on a bicycle and you, according to them, you are on their roads. And some of these roads are remote. Now, I'm not saying that somebody's going to wake up that morning and say, I'm in the mood to kill somebody. but sometimes you don't have to hand yourself over on a silver platter. And that was the way I sort of like functioned. And some of these fears happened to be true. You know, in one stage, somebody followed me in a pickup 3 times trying to run me down, you know, and I hopped on a curb. And it's only when I took my camera out and I took a picture of the vehicle that he left me alone.
Oh my gosh.
Now, I had people saying, are you sure it happened? Or, you know, and I'm like, I think I know when somebody's charging me at me with a car. But here's the funny part. It happened in Mississippi. And I just wrote on my social media because I wanted to put it out there just in case something happened to me. I posted a picture of the vehicle. It was blurry. There were blurry pictures. And I wrote, this man in a blue pickup truck tried to run me down 3 times. That's what I wrote. And then the internet lost its mind. They turned it to the whole racial thing. Said, you see it because it's racist and this and that. And then people in the, you know, some people in those states said, hey, we're not all racist. Why would you put it in racist? Maybe it's because you're in a bicycle. Maybe it's because maybe. And then some person even wrote, oh, maybe it's somebody who knew you and wanted to say hi and kept coming back. And I'm like, what? And so for me, I was pretty amused because I said, you know, if you go back to the post, which is still up there, I wrote, someone in a blue pickup truck tried to run me down. It's all of you assumed, because I'm in Mississippi, and you know that deep down it's likely to happen, you turn into a whole race thing. So why are you attacking me that I turn into a whole race thing? And I don't mean, and I never even mentioned race, but you're the one bringing up race, and yet you're attacking me. And not only that, you are saying that my life was in danger, and yet I even fell off my bike because I forgot that I had panniers, and I tried to bunny hop on the sidewalk, but I had too much weight and I fell over. So, but fortunately I fell on the sidewalk, you know, and away from the car, and people trying to like fight me up that it didn't happen and this and that, and that's the one thing that annoyed me a little bit because I was like, I almost died, and you also had the people saying, yeah, but you should focus on the positive. The whole trip was great, and I'm like, you know, there's no such a thing as a near birth experience. But there's such a thing as a near death experience. Right now, my life was literally in danger. Somebody came trying to kill me, to murder me. And you want me to just casually brush it off? Yes, of course, it's not the highlight of my trip. You know, I keep telling everyone who wants to hear, my US trip was fantastic. I met people who were nice to me. I think for those 6 months, I was the most spoiled human being in the US because the Americans took care of me and this and that. But it will be naive or stupid or even untrue to say that it was all, you know, if 1% of it was not great, but then it also involved my bank, you know, somebody trying to kill me. I think it's only fair that I remember it, because the last time I felt I had that feeling was in the genocide when people came to try and kill their family. I was like, oh my gosh, this is the end. That's the last time I felt me being close to death like that. You know, especially since this person was doing it on a highway, on a busy road, in front of, like, with no impunity, as in, I'm trying to run this guy down, and other cars were just driving by, and I'm like, no one is doing anything. And I found that to be shocking. So, fears, you know, those were my fears, and most of them were founded. Fortunately, you know, nothing else like that happened. I mean, eventually in Alabama had some incidents too, and Florida had some incidents, but Florida was just weird because we had, like, Mississippi and Alabama, and I can sort of like excuse it because I was on the road and, you know, they don't have wide shoulders, so I just blame it on frustrated motorists. But it just happens that, you know, the reason why I think it might be race related was because 80% of the abuse I got on the whole trip, if not 90%, was in Alabama and Mississippi, and Alabama and Mississippi across both states within 24 hours. So the shortest places I spent the least time, I got the most abuse over the course of 6 months. You know, sometimes they either really hate bicycles or, you know, or something else. Now, I don't know. The person did not roll out his window and say, hey, you person, because, you know, who has a different color skin than me, I'm going to come run you down, you know. Then, unfortunately, they don't give, it's not like in the old Western movies where people say, hey, I challenge you to death, you know, I'm coming to kill you, you know. They don't give you a notice, you know. These people are usually cowards, and they try to come and just kill you, you know what I mean? But Florida was interesting because Florida has the best roads in the whole of the US. The best roads, and they have very wide shoulders for cyclists. And yet people were still like coming and giving me hell. I'm like, what are you doing? Get off the road. And I'm like, I'm literally not even on the road. I'm on the back, I'm on the shoulder. But I just think it's just people frustrated. I don't know. But I really can't tell if it was racially, because if right now I had to like bet $1 million on it and say, was it racially motivated? I couldn't tell, because I didn't want to really stick around. I wasn't going to flag the person down like, sir, is this because you hate me as a cyclist or is it because you hate me as a black person? I was like, let's get the hell out of here. You know what I mean? Nothing to do with it.
Yeah. You're not going to say, what is the motivation for your hatred, please? I would just like to know that.
Exactly. You know what I mean? Because these people, the most, even looking at them is seen as an act of provocation. You know what I mean? So you just say, okay, let me look down, let me focus on my business and just keep riding. And I'm like, oh my goodness. So, and then after a while, and Florida was interesting because many Floridians sent me messages telling me, please be careful. And what was interesting is that some of these, I would click on the profile and I could see that, they were like pretty conservative and, this and that, because everyone is political and they like to show it on social media. And I'm like, okay, I have people who are very conservative telling me to get the hell out of Florida because I'm not safe there. After maybe 3 days, I made a sharp left and went into Georgia, and which is a pity because I really was looking forward to Florida. But also the reason I really didn't ride Florida was because I was running out of time. So I didn't really have all the time to, to go through all the way to Miami and come back up. I don't have the time and people advise me against it. Let me just get the hell out of here, which I did. Because again, I don't want to be one of those people. I'm not a hero. I want to be alive, because people forget that, I'd rather people throw roses at me when I'm alive, when I'm not dead, because I'm not going to get the roses when I'm dead. So, and also I'm not a professional. I'm not paid to do this. And so I should not be risking my life doing it.
I really appreciate you sharing these, sort of the dark side of this story of your trip. I find it frightening and scary, and I can only imagine how it felt for you. But and I don't want to focus on this too deeply. I mean, the negative, let's say. But there is a story that I want to ask you about. You had your bike stolen, and I believe you called the police. Maybe could you tell us a bit about that story?
So I'm in Portland, Maine, and I've just finished because basically I didn't ride across the US. I rode around. So my first bit was to go from Vancouver, Seattle, all the way to Portland, Maine, because that was one side, and then I had to come back. So I'm getting excited. I'm like, oh my goodness, I can't believe I go to Portland, Maine to begin with. I'm surprised. And then I'm getting ready to start the journey back. So before that, I went to Whole Foods to get some food, because I'm like, okay, this is Maine, they have good food. I bring my bike into the supermarket with me, into the supermarket where they put the trolleys. And yes, I do not lock my bike. That is a fact. And yes, it's my fault. But the reason I don't lock my bike is usually I'm in small towns. Also, I figured I'm in Portland, Maine, and I let my guard down because in Portland, I got such a VIP treatment that I got carried away. Oh, everyone is so nice here, and then my brain, I don't know what the heck happened to me. My brain, I let my guard down and I need to get food. And the reason I actually don't lock my bike is because, you lock your bike, but then I have to take the panniers off. I have to take my GPS off. You have to take, and even if you lock your bike, somebody can come and take the saddle. Everything nowadays is you just need like one tool to take it apart. So my strategy is always to have it nearby where I can keep an eye on it. But then I went to Whole Foods and I got carried away by the desserts. And then I come back and my bike is not there. I'm like, oh, maybe they didn't want it in the way because it's in the trolley, it's hampering, like maybe it was a hazard. So they moved it. For 5 minutes, I'm asking, where did people put my bike? And then I realized, hang on a minute, I think my bike has been stolen. And I'm out there freaking out. I'm like, oh my gosh, what to do? And I'm like, oh crap, it's happened to me again. Because when I rode across Canada, my bike got stolen. It was in Burlington, Ontario. So I decided, let me call 911. And then I was such in a state of panic that I said, oh my gosh, what is the emergency? I literally remember asking myself in French, because I think in French, what is the 911 number in the US? I was like, oh crap, the same one as in Canada. So then I dialed 911. And to be honest, I knew it was over. That bike was gone. Because I'm like in Portland, there's a big cycling culture, so it probably means that there's like a big crime syndicate that targets bicycles. It's over. So I called 911, and the responder, she asked me a bunch of questions, details. But in my mind, she was just asking me to pretend. Because at first I said, this is not a life and death situation. If I need to call another number, please let me know. They're like, no, your bike got stolen. What's the deal? And then I described the bike. I said, it's black. Everything is black, except for the tires that are like gum. And they said, oh, and who are you? And I introduced myself. I said, I'm a Canadian citizen. I'm running around the US, and I was about to head back to Seattle, and my bike had just got stolen. And then I posted it on social media. I made the 911 call at 9:16. 9:37, I got a phone call saying, your bike is right here. The police found it. So for starters, what happened is that I also posted it on social media, and I told my host, my Portland host, that my bike had been stolen. So the kind of people of Portland, the police, like people left work. People left the workplace, hopped on bike to try to go around Portland looking for the bike. And then my host also knew where to go, and the police knew where to go. And it's just crazy that everyone went towards the same point, and they knew where to go. And it's a place where there's like a big... Okay, so this is where, I'm going to say what happened, and I'm going to have to sort of like clear it. It was a place where there were many people who are suffering from homelessness and substance abuse, because they knew they had to go there because it's the only place everyone thought of going first. And lo and behold, they saw somebody out there pushing my bike, because I don't think he was able to shift it properly, because when I got the bike, I realized it was in the biggest gear and there was a big hill, so just pushed the bike. And the police told me, what do you want to do? And I'm like, you know what? When I was out there at the supermarket, trying to figure out what I was going to do, I was praying for my bike to get my bike back. And I said, oh, Lord, I just want my bike back. I have my bike back. Nothing is missing. I don't want to press charges. This is a person who saw an opportunity and took it. I don't think this person woke up this morning wanting to steal a bike. I got my bike. I don't want to get anyone in trouble. But I think I did, because they asked me what the value of the bike was and what was in it. And I had my laptop, so I gave a value. And I learned later that if you steal something over a certain value, it becomes like something, So then I told the police, listen, none of these people are sitting on these streets because they want to. There's always a story behind somebody on abusing of, narcotics and this and that. If this person took my bike and wanted to sell it off to get a quick fix, I'm not happy with it, but I understand it. And I got my bike. The world can just go back to normal. And hopefully this person will know that they just dodged a big one, and they'll never do it again. But also, when I was a kid, I'm not going to sit here and be a hypocrite. When I was a kid, I stole stuff. And people, were nice to me and let me go off. So if it's my way for me to sort of like pay it forward, so be it. I'll have my bike. The only thing that just messes me up is that this guy turned off my GPS. So now, I'm going to have to go back to the water and start again, because, if it's not on Strava, it didn't happen. Because I don't want people to go 10 years from now. He's like, no. Those 5 kilometers, you didn't ride them, And like, that's the only thing that bums me. The fact that, and then...
Your biggest worry at the end of it was your Strava.
And he cross-chained my bike. I wanted to tell him that next time you shift, you shouldn't cross-chain, because that's not good for the drive train.
There you go. You turned it into a teachable moment.
Then the police are looking at me going like, really? I'm like, yeah, really. Like, let's just call it a day. And, like now I just I have to get to Seattle. They're like, what? I'm like, yeah, I have to get to Seattle. That's where I was going. I'm going to Seattle. They're like, you get to Seattle today? I'm like, no, I'm not going to get to there today. I am riding my bike. And then I tried to get on the bike and I couldn't clip, I couldn't do anything. And then my host said, you know what, you're still in shock. Just come spend an extra day in Portland and just relax. And that day, so I went and just hung out, and I was chilling and I was relaxing, and it turned out to be a great end because I got my bike back. But I was really, really mad at myself, but I wasn't even mad at myself. I was just frustrated because the one place I thought it was the safest inside the supermarket, that's where it got taken. And I was mad because these are very expensive bikes, and I do know that even though the brands gave them to to me, I'm still responsible for those bikes. And also I'm on a mission, I couldn't let this ride end because I didn't have a bike. And I didn't want to go and say, listen, my bike got stolen, because it feels so responsible. I mean, it was responsible of me. And it's an honest mistake I will always own. And now, and did I get a chain? No, I didn't. But now I don't care. Now, when I go to the supermarket, I tell them, my bike got stolen in Portland. Do you want it to get stolen over here? And usually they're like, okay, just put it over here.
Near the beginning of our conversation, we touched on the idea of what Canadians and Americans have in common and maybe what their differences are. Let's start with a major difference you detected, or can you boil down a major difference between let's say riding in the US versus riding in Canada?
For me, the one major difference is I really thought that Canadians were just American with healthcare and were just more reserved. But I will actually say that Americans are more sincere than Canadians, because Canadians are polite. And being polite does not mean being nice. It just means you're polite. Whereas Americans, if they like you, they'll tell you. If they don't like you, they'll tell you. You know where you stand. With Canadians, you have no idea. And that sort of like manifests itself on the road too. You know what I mean? And I mean, I have a quick example that I like to share. One day when I was in Saskatchewan, I can never pronounce that word, and I was riding across Canada, I was having lunch. But because like I said, I leaned my bike against the wall so that I could watch it across, over in the restaurant while I sat next to it outside. I was inside, but the bike was outside. And I usually leave my tail light flashing, and I have a very bright tail light because, I'm on the highway. I want to be seen as far as I can. So my tail light can be seen up to 5 kilometers. And the truck drivers were actually telling me that, that was good because it gave them time to make room to move one lane. So I go to the restaurant and meeting, and then a lady comes up to me. It's like, oh, that's a bright light. I'm like, yes, it's a bright light. I got it because I'm riding across Canada and I want people to see me. She's like, oh, that's very nice. I'm like, and then she's like, yeah, but it's very bright. I'm like, yes, this and that, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, and out there describing it and this and that. 1 week later, I'm again at a restaurant. I'm like, oh, wow, that's a bright light. Somebody else. I'm like, that's a bright light and this and that. I'm like, yeah, but do you think maybe you can turn it up a little bit? I'm like, oh. And then I realized 2 weeks prior, that lady was telling me, your freaking light is too bright. Turn it off. And I was like, oh my gosh, I never got it. Again, like, 4 years later, I'm in the US, or 4 or 5 years later, I forgot how long, I'm in the US. Again, I go to a restaurant, I lean my bike against the window and I go in there. And inside, right there, a bunch of people, oh man, turn that thing off, it's too bright. Right there, like, turn it off, it's too bright. And then I go back outside, like, my bad, I go off, and then I turn it off. And that is, for me, that's one of the best examples,
I imagine after they said, hey, that's too bright, that was the end of it, right? There was like, we're on to the next thing.
That was the end of it. And then I could go back inside. They're like, hey, where are you from? And actually, some people wanted to buy me lunch. And I'm like, no, I'm okay, and this and that. And they were all telling me, you need to be careful out there. I'm like, that's why I have the light. And I have another story, So I am out there. I was with one host, and I'm getting ready to go. So I'm like, putting my stuff in my bag and this and that. I was like, oh, and the man goes, oh, what are you packing? And I'm like, well, in this bag, because everyone was surprised at how light I was traveling. And I'm like, well, in this bag, as you can see, right now I'm going to put my PJs in there, the stuff I wear off bike, and then put my kit on, and then this and that. And then he goes, yeah, but what are you packing? And I'm like, what do you mean, what am I packing? I'm like, no, just told you I'm packing this and this, and I have this and this. And then repeated, and I'm like, what the heck am I missing? And then he goes, my man, what kind of gun are you packing? And I'm like, what? What do you mean, what gun? I'm like, yeah, it's a dangerous country. You don't have a gun? I'm like, what do you mean I don't have a gun? Why would I be on a bicycle and have a gun? I'm like, and then the gentleman was surprised. I mean, he called his wife and said, this man is riding around the US and he's not like packing. Now, I was shocked because he didn't even ask the first question that should be asked, which is, are you packing? He just went straight to the point and said, what are you packing? Like, as in, it goes without saying that, of course, you're packing. What are you packing? And that surprised me and that's something I kept getting along the way. People asking me, and it doesn't matter whether it was like conservative people or liberal people. It was everyone was asking me like, hey, like how do you do for your own security? And I'm like, and then one day I told people, I gave them this example. I'm like, the thing with guns, and that's my take on guns. If I know that I can look after myself, I'm going to take chances and go places I have no business being. And when you go places where you have no business being, then the business finds you. And if weapons have to be drawn, you're gambling because, you're bringing a small gun. What if these people have like a machine gun or this and that? Or how would you even know? Or what if like a stray bullet goes and hits somebody? And that's outside the fact that I'm actually a foreigner. I have no business even owning a firearm, in this country. And people said, yeah, but if something happens to me. And then I said, okay, fine. Let's suppose somebody comes, sneaks up behind me and tries to run me down. When exactly am I going to have time to turn around, draw a weapon, and then fire? And people were like, yeah, but I think and everyone was still like, okay, we still don't buy that. You still need safety. And some people wanted to take me to, they're like, no, don't worry. There are places you can go. You don't need we can just get you one and this and that. I was like, I swear.
So wait, some people were going to help you go gun shopping.
Yeah. They're like, we can help you, we can find you. And then it's like, it's quickly, going to teach you quickly how to use it. It's fun. There's some ones that, you can get you a tiny one that you can put in your, because I had some cargo pants, and one of them had like some of my bibs had like rear pockets that like you can even put it there. Or we can get you like a belt that you can put it on and this and that. And I was like, no, I really don't. I'm like, so you're just going out there exposed like that? Wow, you're so brave. So for them being out there being without carrying, that was the bravery act. And that was like, wow, that was, for me, that was, because I've heard about that, but when it happened to me, I couldn't believe that. And I really thought people were messing around, but they were serious. They were dead serious. For me, I would say that was the biggest culture shock.
I think you've been home for a little close to a month. We're speaking in early September.
Less than a month.
Oh, just less than a month. How are your legs feeling?
Surprisingly, I'm not even tired. I find myself tired when I'm not riding my bike. Because then I feel lethargic. I feel, I was going to say I feel fat, but that sounds weird because I'm skinny. And then also I don't want to sound like I'm fat shaming. But I feel like bloated, rather. Actually, it's bloated, I meant to say. I feel like heavy and I feel like unhappy. So I ride my bike like around, but I feel tired. And the only thing that was hurting was my bum and my hands. They were hurting. But then I guess, it all went away. And the one thing that's a little bit hard is the lack of routine, because until now my body wakes up at 5 and I keep DJ hours, so I'm not a morning person. But at 5 I'm like, oh my gosh, I still have that PTSD. Oh my gosh, I overslept. I need to go somewhere, and I'm struggling to shake it. But other than that, if right now I had I'm ready for another adventure, because it seems like my body have forgotten how it feels to be brutalized by the wind. And I told the story of how, it feels like maybe like I'm like a woman, who forgets what birth pain is. Otherwise, nobody would have other children, right? Because, if you remembered how birth pain was, all families would just have one child. Now, I said this story and then people said, are you comparing your bike ride to giving birth? What is that? And people were ready to cancel me left, right, and center. And I said, excuse me, you misunderstood me. What I said is that the human will forget pain. Pain as physical pain, we cannot remember that. We cannot remember how it felt. And right now I feel that I've forgotten the agony I went through in the wind. And I'm almost tempted to go back on another journey. However, I promised myself that I was done with journeys longer than 1 month, unless I'm getting sponsored and I'm getting paid to do them. Meaning I'm actually drawing a salary, because I moved to Vancouver right now and the housing market is insane. And if I want to buy a house here, I can't be on a bicycle all day. It's life to normal, but it's not back life to normal because the pandemic is over and I'm in a new city. So I have to create a new normal. And already I can't even create that new normal because already in September, I'm going back to Montreal and I'm going to be in Ottawa and Toronto visiting some friends and riding with some people. And then in October, I'm going to a cycling safari in Kenya because, again, that's one of the perks of being out there. They said, hey, do you want to go on a cycling safari? All the expenses paid. I'm like, actually, I don't have the time. I was like, idiot. Of course you have the time. Oh, yes, I have the time, So I'm going to be going in October. And then on my way back, I'm going to spend some time in the UK DJing. And then from there, I have to decide if I want to come back to Vancouver because even though it's the warmest place, one of the warmest places in Canada, 6 months of rain does not sound too appealing to me, especially if the world is reopening. So, ...
We will leave it there. Thank you so much for sharing your stories, your perspectives, and your insights with your humor. That ... I hope we pick those up again, those ellipses up again, and we'll have another chat about the places that your bike will take you. Thank you, JaBig.
Thank you so much for having me.
And that's the episode. It is written and edited by me, Matthew Pioro. I had help from Matt Hansen. Thank you, Matt.
You're always welcome.
Also, thanks to web editor Terry McCall. He's always lending a hand around here, whether it's riser bar bikes or curly bar bikes. That man is bilingual. This episode is produced by Adam Killick. He did the music too. And also thanks to Ontario Creates for its support. Matt, with the Grand Prix races this weekend, and I got to take the Grom mountain biking on Saturday. I don't think we're going to get out for a ride this weekend.
Sort of funny coincidence that you're saying that after last week, we went riding, and we were riding up the hill, and I was feeling pretty good, and you said, I don't want to ride with you anymore. It's sort of kind of a cute little coincidence that all this stuff is happening now. Huh.
This is purely coincidence. It has nothing to do with anything I might have said under duress on a climb with you, with unshakable Matt Hansen. I don't like this new, fitter Matt Hansen.
You said to me, I need you to get fitter, Matt, or you won't be able to work here anymore. You said that to me.
I don't know why you say that. I've never said that. You know, your performance at this job has nothing to do with watts. I don't care. I don't know. I'm going to ask listeners. I'm sure they've heard me say that. Why haven't you heard me say that?
I hear you say it, and then it just sort of, I know you're just saying that, but you don't really mean it. You know, it's sort of like, I know, like I can see your face right now, and I know, so you're doing a little kind of thing, a little kind of twitch. I know, I got it. Wink, wink. Gotcha. Yeah. Watts have nothing to do with my performance. Wink, wink. Gotcha. Touch my nose.
I don't know what's more exhausting, trying to keep up with you as you hoon it down Jane Street, or this repeated conversation that I'm having this Groundhog Day with you.
All right, well, I think we've reached the end of this session. It looks like I think we're done here.
I look forward to riding with you soon, Matt. It won't be this weekend, though.
It's fine. I'm very busy.
I'm sure you are.
I'll be riding at 4 o'clock in the morning so I can be ready for the races.
Nice. I like how you're going to get your rides out of the way so you can watch the pros. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Please rate and review the show. Ride safely, and we'll talk to you later.